This guy. And I'll press record on this guy. Oh, okay. So must need to leave the studio. Log in. Okay, I guess it's recording.
Okay.
This is the most important part though. I press this record button to get my audio tracks. Very good. Okay, let's bring this guy in. That'll work.
Okay.
And let me just make sure you're not differently aligned than Rachel. Ah, perfect. Looks great.
Okay.
All right. Well, hello, Burning Man. Hello, America. This is Justin at Seeking Context, speaking today with Renzo Beck, who is an architect and an artist and the designer of the Empyrean Temple in Burning Man 2022. So thanks very much for speaking with me today, Renzo.
Sure, Justin. Thank you for having me in your nice living room.
It's my pleasure. I want to start out by asking if you could tell me about, well, first off, if you can just state your name and where you're from, and we'll use that at the start of the show.
Sure. Renzo Beck, and Boulder-based architect and artist, now still in the Russian River Valley of Northern California.
Cool. And so tell me about your work, your architecture practice and your sculpture practice.
So my architecture practice is, I'm a solo practitioner, and I do designs for residences and commercial buildings and a number of different things. And occasionally a temple or two. And my sculpture is, but I make my living as an architect and in land development, that kind of thing. But my sculpture is in stone and steel, and is frankly more of a hobby because it doesn't really produce that much money.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just something I do for enjoyment.
Right. But you get it's a creative outlet for you.
It's a huge creative outlet, and I spend a tremendous amount of time sculpting stone and steel and wood, and more time than I should because. But I love doing it.
Yeah. And so tell me how you got into architecture. Has this been a lifelong passion for you?
Yes, it has. It's really the only thing I've ever wanted to do is be an artist and an architect, and I've never had a plan B. And I've never really done anything else. So I studied art and architecture in high school and went to a university that had an architecture program expressly for that. And I've either been in some faceted construction or architecture my whole life.
Mm-hmm. And so when did you design your first house that got built?
That got built. I guess I was still in college, and I was working and there was a, do cabins as a kid in the woods count as the first house?
It would for me.
Okay. I loved building cabins in the woods starting at probably age 14 or 15, and so I built tree forts and little one-room cabins with wood stoves in them, and actually there's one I built that's probably about 12 by 20 with the full roof and everything, and it had bunk beds in it and a wood stove, and it was a full-on retirement village in the woods.
Was this for a client?
No,
at this
it's
young
just
age,
for
or for
myself.
yourself,
It's
for
just
your,
myself
your
and my
friends,
buddies.
and
Yeah. And we'd go there, and we thought we were in the middle of nowhere. We were really just like 400 yards from my house, but we're surrounded by a lot of woods, and we'd just go there and drink beer, hang out. But the first one for a client, probably when I was in college, still a student, I was doing designs for a few residences. I had done designs for a few residences in Boulder. And it's fun to drive around and still see them, and 35 years later.
Right. That's cool. And so you've always been in practice on your own. You've never.
No, I've worked for a couple of firms over the years, and architecture requires, to getting a license in architecture requires a degree and an internship, which is so. So I had to do an internship with a professional architecture firm, and stayed with. I did about 15 years in the office, I guess, and but that's part of being in an office. It drove me in. It was a lot of fun to be an architect in an office, but it kind of drove me nuts, which is why I think I spent so much time sculpting. Because sculpting is outside. I do it outside because it's big and dusty, and but that's a bit of a reaction to working in an office, which has its merits, but I don't really want to spend my life in an office.
Right. The balance needs to be shifted a little bit more into the outdoors and
Yes.
creating something.
Right. Which is why I'm still working on a big sculpture up in Santa Rosa, but it's outside, and I just love being outside sculpting.
Right. Well, so how did things unfold where it came to be that you decided to submit a plan for a temple at Burning Man?
So I had 23 years ago, I went to Burning Man and didn't go back until 2019. And a friend of a friend basically got me on the crew for Temple of Direction, 2019. So I went out early in the process, probably day 2 or 3 of the build, so in early August of 2019, to work on Temple of Direction, and after about 3 days on Playa, and I hadn't been there for 20 years, and I didn't know anybody. I knew one person by their first name, and that's it. I was just having a great time, and I thought to myself, I want to do this. What I studied at the University of Colorado is essentially sacred architecture, and there's lots of facets to architecture. Sometimes frankly, it's pretty pictures and pretty buildings, and it can be so many different things, but the College of Environmental Design is focused on what the value and the meaning and the sacredness of architecture. So I had, I didn't know what Burning Man Temple was. I had no idea what it was when I went out to build it. I didn't really care. I just wanted to go build something and be part of the Burning Man ethos. And then when I realized what it was about, I thought, well, I want to design one of these. So after 3 days of being on Playa, in the absence of 20 years, and never seeing a Burning Man temple, I thought, this is really cool. These people are really just energetic, and they want to build, and they're artists, and the volunteer staff was so enthusiastic and warm and welcoming, and just thought I wanted to be part of that.
Mm-hmm. And you said just a second ago that when you figured out what it was about, what is it about to you?
So there's an architecture professor, Christopher Alexander, out of the University of California, Berkeley, who wrote in the late 70s, early 80s, a seminal work called A Timeless Way of Building, I think. And what he proposed in that many things, but what he proposed and what he was discussing is the idea that a certain space or environment comes to life by essentially some kind of very difficult, some entity or some quality that is very difficult to identify, and that quality is the result of the ritualization of space. And so the ritualization of space is, you know, what kind of ceremony is used to create types of processional interaction in a built environment. It could be a building or a outdoor space or a park or a city center or anything. What kind of what is the process that creates a livable and exciting space? And the answer is that there is a ritualization that creates a sacred space, and that's a very elusive thing. It's very difficult to define or see or plan for, but that's what sacred architecture is, the development of sacred spaces. Mm-hmm. And so, to answer your question, what is it? It's the design and development and creation of sacred space. Mm-hmm. I think that's what you asked.
Yeah, it is. So, I mean, when I was curious about, like, you had this experience in 2019, and you said after the first 3 days, I'm like, I got it. Like, there's something here that I got to be part of.
Right. So
and I was just curious about that.
Because people were creating, as an architect, you don't ever get to create a temple from scratch, and it's a thing you study and you can theorize about. But if you create a building, it's going to be a mosque or a Buddhist temple or a Christian church or a Hindu temple, because those are going to be your clients, because those are things that are the idea of creating basically a sacred space out of nothing, as in the Black Rock Desert. Mm-hmm. And just poof, you create a space for reasons that aren't identified by dogma, Christianity, or the other major religions, and which is highly exclusive. I'm rambling again, but what I saw was people wanting to create something really dynamic, and they didn't know what it was. And they didn't have to know what it was, and almost nobody said, "I'm doing this because." They were just there. And so, why you on Playa building this temple? And the question was essentially never asked, but there was so much energy and goodwill and inclusion and desire that it was infectious. And as an architectural practitioner, I believed I knew where that was going, which is creating community-developed creation of sacred space. Mm-hmm. So, and I still don't know if I answered your question.
No, totally, you did. And I'm curious, so then you had that inspiration in 2019, and you went home, and did you just get out a piece of paper and start sketching ideas? How did the design that ended up coming to fruition start?
It was, I was already thinking of concepts on day 3 on Playa. So that was, August 15th or so. And I was already imagining what a temple would look like. And I came up with the idea of, I saw how hard people were working, and I got a feel for, I didn't know hardly anything about Burning Man. The first time I had gone 20 years prior, I was only there for 3 days or so, 3 or 4 days, and I ran out of food and water and left. And I didn't know anybody, because I couldn't find the party I was set to meet. So I was by myself the whole time in a tent, just in an open parking lot someplace. I don't really remember. But anyway, what did I say? Yes, so I just started, in my mind, I started sketching things and visualizing things, and really going home in September, October, November was a constant effort to come up with a design. The original design, my thought was to call it a maker temple and to allow in recognition of all the people who build the city, the makers, and because that's what Burning Man is about. It's about building the city. You can do it physically or other ways, but that's the unique thing, is that the people are not participants. They make the city, and so.
If you just I'll turn it.
I just spun it around. So.
Yeah, that's.
Okay, so you think that audio's okay?
Yeah, the audio will be fine. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, and I had a motif and I had ideas and conceptual designs on what would govern the design and how it would flow and that kind of thing. And I created a narrative, several narratives to guide the design, and some of those original concepts are seen in Empyrean, but it took a lot of work to actually get a workable concept.
Mm-hmm. And are you talking about the design of the panels and the portals, like the shapes, or what was the original set of concepts that you tried to start with?
The original set of concepts. There's lots of different ways to design, and I think designing through metaphor is the most common way. You could say, okay, well, we need a building, and it needs to do these functionary things, and so let's just solve the problem. But designing through metaphor, you basically create a story, and the story will guide the physical design process. So the story was that the metaphor that I came up with was the path and journey and security and sacred space. And so that I just imagined a path through a wilderness-like area with the canopy, with the trees creating a canopy through a processional way, and also kind of like a stream, and then the end being the sacred space that you got to with at the end of the path, as the canopy of trees opened up into some place. And it was something like a stream or a rock that you wanted to sit on. It could be much more than that. It could be the tomb of Muhammad in Mecca. Why can't I think of the name of that? But it's there's. Go ahead.
The Cabal?
No, what is the actual the tomb called in? Anyway, here's the point: is that it could be something very great like that, or a great cathedral in Europe, and that's your pilgrimage, and you go through all this pilgrimage route, and you get to the cathedral, and that's the sacred space, and it becomes sacred because you went through the ritual of getting there. And so, but I use something much more organic, and outside the dogmas of conventional religion, not dogmas, but teachings. And yeah, I'll quit there.
Right, and so was that journey is like the idea of like walking through the portals as you're approaching the space?
So yes, and the portals developed later. So what happened is that the original design was a bunch of canopies or shelters, which is what Empyrean had, those giant canopies. But originally it was along a linear path. And so the canopies were set in a staggered space along a path. And it didn't really have a center in that respect. And so I went through hundreds of geometries that might work. But part of the criterion for Burning Man is that there needs to be a central space, and the building has to burn, which is, burning a building is really contrary to most people's architect's thought process. So the density had to increase around a center space, so that idea of a linear path with canopies and safe kind of caves along the way, along it, wrapped around itself, and I had spiral patterns and square, and initially I took all those canopies and pointed them out So they were welcoming to people coming in, but that didn't create a center space. So then spun them around, and there was 4 and 6 of them, and so it went through a very long process. I mean, literally hundreds of different designs, quick thumbnail sketches, and I
And are you sharing these with people, or are you just doing them all sort of?
I shared them with a number of people, but people get nervous about. You have to be careful who you share them with, because people look at them and it's like, oh, that doesn't work. It's like, well, that's part of the design process. You start with a single line on a piece of paper, and it doesn't look like anything, and you put 2 or 3, and all of a sudden you have. It takes a while to develop, and so yes, I was sharing them with some people, but a little bit more on the design process. So the canopies came into a circular pattern, and there was up to 12 of these canopies, and then I reduced them to 8. And then I had the one, and I realized, oh, well, this is a very jagged kind of masculine looking thing from the outside, but on the inside it's a very circular and even feminine space, and part of the Burning Man Criterion Temple has to have a large gathering space. So it evolved over time, and lots and lots of iterations, hundreds of iterations. So I had that giant compression ring as an actual compression ring that all the canopies would lean up against. And so I took out the compression ring because I thought that would be too difficult. The construction sequencing on Playa of putting up a compression ring in a true form and then leaning all the canopies against the compression ring was too difficult. So I had a 3D model of it, and I took it out, and I made all the canopies stand. I designed them so they could stand freely. So in the event that the weather got bad, or the dust storms came in, if we only got to all the canopies being set up, each one of them could stand on their own, and it didn't rely on the whole process. So the whole way through the process, I was thinking about building on Playa, and what if we ran out of time? What if we ran out of money? What if we didn't have enough skill set? What if the weather got too bad? So initially I was thinking we would never actually build all 8 canopies. Okay, so we did that, and then I realized after I designed them so they could be freestanding, I put the compression ring back in the model, in the 3D model, because I thought, well, I'd already designed it, and it looks really cool, and it actually holds the roof of the structure, even though there's no real roof, but it holds the physical space by having a compression ring or that geometric pattern on top of the central gathering area. And then, so that was already early November after working on it September and October, and I was really frustrated.
When's the deadline to submit?
The deadline to submit was the 19th of November. And I was really frustrated about how many, I was working with somebody else on some design who had some input, but somebody was there to comment on it routinely. But I was getting very frustrated that I didn't have a solid conceptual design. So the canopies, 4 large, 4 small, 8 total around a circular gathering space, and the compression ring above really felt like a strong design. And it really had the elements of what I felt were an appropriate, acceptable design for Burning Man. And along the way, by the way, you asked about the panels and the idea, and the idea was that the canopies were basically just skeletal frames on which lots of other artists could basically design and build their artwork that would plug in almost like a quilt, not almost like, but really that's where the idea was. It was people would kind of plug in their artwork that was semi-transparent like a quilt over these canopies. And I worked on that one for all of 2020 and 2021, and finally I way overshot the moon on that one. The idea of having all these artists design their own artwork to put on this was a clusterfuck. and I designed all of the panels myself, and just used that as an opportunity to invite other people to participate, which was fantastic. But I digress. So what I had, all the canopies and the compression ring was on, and the scale of the building was set, and I looked at all the entrances and exit points and thought about the lighting, and I was really feeling good about it. And then the idea came up there was an idea of what kind of altar would be in the center. And I didn't want to put an altar in there because that projects that it seemed too religiously dogmatic for me to put an altar in the center. And the idea is that the people are the ones that build a community. The altar focuses on something that's not there, that suggests a higher being or a higher entity, which is fine. But my thought was, that's not what creates this space. What creates the space is the people in it, so remove the altar. And traditionally, temples of all kinds, including all Burning Man temples, have altars. Ultimately, Empyrean didn't. So at that stage, I was thinking about putting a small cauldron of fire in the middle, like a real cauldron of fire. And I didn't want to have fire in the building because it's such a hazard. I didn't want to have an altar. So I created literally in about 20 seconds when the thought came to mind about changing the name to Empyrean. And Empyrean is about the space between heaven and earth and the connection between heaven and earth. That's the medieval 12th century use of the term Empyrean. But that comes from, there was a name change from the Maker Temple to Empyrean, because the Maker Temple didn't really have a good ring for Burning Man Temple. I thought it was very appropriate for the inclusion of everybody, but it didn't really have a nice ring. So it was changed to Empyrean. And then I thought, Empyrean, fire, communication, heaven above, ground below, the people communicate between the two. So I designed the flame, which was 55 feet tall, in probably 30 seconds. And I just kind of extruded it on the computer model and stuck it in the middle of the ring, and then physically spun the model digitally in kind of a little mini video. And as soon as I did that, I realized it was a solidly feasible potential project.
And was that the design that you submitted in 2019?
Yes.
Or did the flame come after?
No,
Okay.
so the flame, the ring, and the 8 canopies were all there in this middle for 2019.
Okay.
The portals that you mentioned a couple times, they were all changed over the course of time, and I reimagined that for the 2022 temple.
Cool. Can you talk about the design of the panels? I think there's 4 different designs, and
Yeah.
I'm assuming that there's a symbolic importance to each one of those designs.
So there are 4 different panels, and there's 11 different iterations of them because they use different widths of wood for a different architectural look. But the 4 designs, one for each cardinal direction, and mostly they were designs almost exclusively to create a tessellating pattern over the canopies, because it was a really nice architectural facade, and the lighting on it, and they were designed to create a dynamic space in the day and night lighting. And also, I wanted to have something that was relatively easy to build, but still a lot of fun for volunteers. So lots of people could volunteer on the project and build these panels. And there ended up being 432 of them. And it took a lot of volunteer hours. But okay, so the 4 different directions are. So what's important is that it was a nice design that was allowed for an entopic experience inside and outside. Entopic as basically a visualization of the I. That created a dynamic facade for the structure. Um, the names of them kind of came afterwards, and there is some importance there. So the one to the north is, I imagine, would be it was in reference to Bennu, which is I think the original god, or a Nubian god, which is kind of like the phoenix, which is the god before gods, the first entity that came forth to create the world, or energy, or power, or anything.
Mhm.
And that's on the north. So that the idea is that it's a phoenix in the north. And I just, did that geometry that I came up with actually, was it ever attributed to Bennu, the Nubian god? I doubt it. I'm almost certainly no. I'm almost certain that no, it was not. But I basically just chose it to assign that, ancient deity to the panels that I was creating for the north to kind of guide it a little bit. So there's no effort on my part to basically say, oh, the Nubian god Bennu was a thing, and I want to kind of reconstitute that here. That's not really what I was doing. And however, lots of people find value in that. And so if people come out to Burning Man and they say, oh, this is the northern portal of Bennu, and they know what that means, they want to assign value to that, and even reconstitute the god of the ancient Nubian god, more power to them. But that's not really where I was going with it. The other one is, east is Ishtar, and she is the goddess of many things over probably thousands of years, but love, war, and art. The southern portal, or the southern panels and the southern canopy, was attributed to Ra, which is, of course, the ancient Egyptian god, the sun, who is by and large a solo flyer going across the sky. And then the western one is Atum, which is the name Atum is also a Egyptian god, and that refers to as the Egyptian god of the maker or the finisher. So the idea is, well, the sun, the west, the finishing of the day, the maker and the finisher, and that was really that's where the term maker came from initially. So that was in recognition of all the people who actually bend their back, like yourself, to make temple.
Cool.
I hope you're going to edit all this, because I'm just rambling.
No, this is great. But yeah, it is all edited, so don't worry about it. So you submitted, you hit the deadline, and then what happened? Like, how did you get notified, and then what are you thinking? Like, oh shoot, I've got to build this thing that I can come up with in my mind.
So I have a lot of experience with construction, and I did design something that I could build, and I think that was a big factor in the selection committee's selecting of the project. It was not just a cool design, but I gave them preliminary documents that showed that it could be built and how it would be built. And so, but yes, we were notified right around Christmas, but officially the notice went out around the 7th of January, and I was really excited. It's a giant piece of artwork, and I was just beyond excited to build it. And but the next steps in that are to refine the architectural design, and then coordinate with engineering and get a game plan for construction. And we were doing all that in the spring of 2020. We had leased a build space in Oakland, Moxie, that was going to start on April 1st. and and I had gotten the engineers going, and we had already had a successful fundraising campaign in February and March, and then around March 20th, COVID shut us down.
Right.
So, again, I have no idea if I answered your question.
Well, I was just curious, like once you got the notice,
Yeah.
like what happened next? How did you start? Like you had to assemble a team.
Oh,
You
that.
had to start. Like when did you?
We had a great team to start with. So pretty much everybody that came on, everybody that was part of the 2019 Temple of Direction build was on the steering committee for Empyrean, and that whole crew was identified in the application to Burning Man as the willing crew for Empyrean.
So all the friends you made.
Yes,
the
all
year
the
prior.
friends. Yes, all the friends I made. I mean, that's essentially every single one of them from the crew of 2019 were identified in the application, and so I started working with all those folks and doing lots of Zoom calls and talking about staff and kitchen and fundraising and website building and outreach and yeah, so that's what we did. And you know, from the beginning, there was a steering committee of 15 people or so, or more, which was chaotic, but it was a lot of fun. I mean, that's the whole idea, is you include lots of people.
Mm-hmm. Right. And so then COVID happened, and Burning Man wasn't canceled right away, right? Like, did you continue?
Well, I continued right up until, so things got weird around the 1st of March. And clearly we were thinking things were being canceled around the world. And clearly we were thinking, well, Burning Man could be canceled. But we just kept going. And I kept planning, we were planning staff, we were planning construction, we're doing budgeting, and we hadn't yet started the construction, but I was doing a lot of design work. The design work continued for months, but the architectural and the engineering was coordinated by late March. But then Burning Man canceled, and we just stopped, and then there were some other ideas on what to do next.
Right. And so then what happened in the following year, and how did things lead to the prototype build up at Santa Rosa?
Somebody had a great idea of taking part of the Empyrean project and putting it in Civic Center Plaza in San Francisco. And to his credit and genius, he actually got it through the city and preliminary approvals. And we have renderings of it, and we thought we were going to build it. But the civil unrest at that time in the streets and COVID that summer of 2020 and going into the fall, it was grinding on people. And the security, the ongoing security necessary for a project like that in Civic Center Plaza, which is 200 feet across and 40 feet tall, would have been 2 of the canopies. And the liability for that was daunting. And I got cold feet and I pulled the plug on the project.
Wow.
And
was it going to be a temporary, or it was going to be a permanent installation?
we had essentially preliminary approvals for a 3-month installation, possibly longer. And it would have been brilliant. It would have been just wonderful. And that you can see in the renderings, it fit just as it was designed, but not thinking of Civic Center Plaza. It fit in there perfectly like it was designed for that. And we had crews lined up, and you know, there's some of the funding there, but I got cold feet. You have to think about what was going on in the fall of 2020, which is easy to forget, but there was a lot of people protesting in the streets about police abuse, and at the same time, COVID was accelerating again, and it was too much.
Right.
So then somebody else on the team had the idea of taking the same idea of what was in Civic Center Plaza and building 2 canopies up in Santa Rosa at the Paradise Ridge Winery. And what I had wanted to do in initially in the build space, starting in April in a regular year, is to build at least 1, maybe 2 prototypes of the canopies just to get our feet wet. And so the idea of being able to build the prototypes in Civic Center Plaza, and where the idea was we're going to take them down and bring them to, they couldn't be there permanently, so we're going to take them down and bring them to Burning Man as part of the whole assembly. And then the idea was to, well, let's go to Santa Rosa at the Paradise Ridge Winery, where there's already a bunch of Burning Man art, and do the installation there and take it down and bring it to Burning Man. So that was October of 2020, and then actually,
So you already had the approval to just redo it the next year.
yeah, no. Yes. Yeah, in October of 2020, there was already a contract in place with myself and Burning Man to do the next year burn, which is 2021. So I had, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you knew that you're like, okay, this is going to go forward a year later.
Right,
At least that's what you thought at the time.
right,
And so we're going to go build 2 prototypes
right.
at
Yes,
Santa Rosa.
and so in November of 2020, we started building the prototypes up at Santa Rosa, and finished those. It took a long time, but that was the height of COVID. So sometimes it was literally just myself up there cutting beams, and then people would come on the weekends. There's some really dedicated folks that showed up frequently, and then on the weekends, as it built up, we might have 30, 40 people out there. And that took all of November, December, January, and well into February. We finally finished it, which made me a little nervous because it took almost 4 months to build 1/10 of the project, and we're going to have to build the entire thing in 17 days or whatever it is, on Playa. That was scary, but we learned a lot along the way.
Yeah. Anything specific that, like, were there aha moments of like, oh, we need to change something in order for this to be successful when we get out to the desert?
Yeah, a number of things. I literally, during those 4 months, I must have changed the blueprints for the panels to make them easier and more, so we could, process hundreds of them at a time and make them easier for people of all skill sets. I changed those designs 30 or 40 times, and they come out every weekend with a new set of blueprints, and just changing things a little bit so it was easier for people to build and get more stock out of a board, and make it faster and that kind of thing. So that was a big factor. And there was a lot of things like how putting the panels, how much time it took to put the panels on the canopies was one of the big aha moments. Is we're going to need a bigger crew. So, yeah, that was not going to be a small crew that was going to build the structure. And
Right.
There's also the barge rafters on the canopies, the ones that lean out. They were very difficult to put in, and so I had to really think through that and be prepared for that on Playa. But had I not done that, had we not done that in Santa Rosa and had that experience, I don't think there's any way we would have even come close to building it on Playa.
Well, yeah. And so then, when was Burning Man canceled the second time, and what happened?
So
how much did you build?
It was so the project in Santa Rosa was completed in February, and clearly we were thinking that I was thinking that Burning Man was going to be canceled a second time, and in September of 2020, Dr. Anthony Fauci, he made national news, and he said it's going to be about another year and a half before the world's back to normal. And to me, that said Burning Man is going to be canceled again. So the Playa, the Santa Rosa project was done, and I drove back to Colorado, and Burning Man was indeed and I was gearing up, and we were ready again for the second time, and we were fundraising, and we were doing staffing and coordination and trucking and trying to build out the crew for construction and the kitchen all the way in February and March. The second time in 2021, and then of course Burning Man was canceled on like March 30th or something like that, of 2021. And and then I'm starting. The crew is starting to go elsewhere. I mean, people are 30 or 40,000 people moved out of San Francisco in those 18 months of COVID, and a lot of people moved, and build spaces were shutting down, and artists were moving out of town, and it was hard to hold it together. And then in May or so, I got on the phone with my contacts at Burning Man, and I thought that we were just going to have a discussion about how I was going to do it in 2022. And their goal on the phone was wrapping up the project. And it's like, okay, well, we're going to select another artist for 2022.
Wow.
And I about hyperventilated. I was just distraught. And I mean, they laid that on me in the Zoom. Probably they told me, and I just didn't listen carefully. They had told me otherwise, and I just didn't listen. But I really wanted to finish the project and bring it to Playa. And so my contacts with the art department, they went to bat for me, and they had to take the project to. There's a Burning Man committee of the temple, which is comprised of 5 or 6 or so experienced and long-running burner participants, and
this is a subcommittee of the org.
The subcommittee of the org, yes, and they're founding members of Burning Man, that kind of thing, who ultimately direct and steer the temple, and mostly direct and select the artist. And so, on my behalf, my contacts at the art department went back to the board, and I was scrambling hard, and I really wanted the project, and I told them that, and they said no, and so I redesigned it and made it new for 2022, because they wanted something new, and they said maybe, and I think they said no a second or third time, and I redesigned it again, and wrote another narrative, and put together a whole slideshow and a PowerPoint presentation, gave it to them again, and they said yes. There was some difficulty with the crew and group dynamics, and
that sounds very stressful.
And yeah, it was so fucking stressful. Yes, and so what I changed was the portals and the entryway to the man, and a number of things, and I really expressed that to the temple committee, and that's ultimately what they bought, so to speak. I mean, they are my clients in this case, and I presented to them an architectural program, and they bought it.
Right. Well, that was just one of many difficult moments, but do you feel like that in a way they pushed you to create a design that was better than it would have been?
Yes. Yeah, and those giant portals, I think, were absolutely monumental. The 6 portals that were out there, and I designed those. I was really excited when I designed them. Some things in architecture design come very quickly, and some come, you labor over sketches and ideas for weeks and weeks and weeks and months and dozens of iterations. And the Empyrean proper, I was literally taking my my school books off the architecture theory school books off the shelf from when I was a college student, and like rereading them when I was designing Empyrean. Like, how do you create a new sacred space from scratch? No one ever does that. But, okay, so that was a very long involved process, but the portal designs came to me in a flash, and I designed them hand sketching, but I did it in a 3D computer model really quickly and put it up on, built it in space, and I was really pleased with it. But it did enhance the project a lot.
That's cool. Well, so then, okay, finally you get the go-ahead for 2022.
Yes, finally, and that was around July 19th for 2022. And it's funny, Burning Man they didn't really tell me. They said, we'll let you know. And then they posted it in Jackrabbit Speak. So the way I found out about it in July, I think, or it might have been early August 2022, somebody called me up and said, congratulations, you got the temple back. And I said, what are you talking about? They said, well, that's what it says in Jackrabbit Speaks. So that was fun. I was on the way to Renegade Bird, I think, or 4th of July, one of those that summer. And then had to gear up I kind of took a break that fall because it was nonstop Empyrean for so long, or nonstop Temple. But I had to kind of redesign it. I wanted to stay ahead of the game. I had all the architectural documentation ready by the first of the year. I was actually sitting on my hands into November, December, because I really wanted to get going, but I didn't want to bug the volunteer corps because they had just heard so much from me and they had done so much. So I didn't want to communicate with them because I didn't want to burn them out.
The rug had been pulled out multiple times.
Too many times. And it was up to me to keep going, and people were pissed, and that Burning Man had been canceled twice, and people moved away, and in a volunteer project that big, people became disgruntled. But there was still a fantastic crew of wonderful people that were like, we're going to do it. We're going to build this thing.
So I think that's an important thing. Like 100% of the people involved are volunteers, right?
100% of the people are involved are volunteers. There's a few specialty things like engineering or trucking or that kind of thing that pay people, but that's the key, is to keep the it's not like the volunteer corps makes the project. The project is the volunteer. It is the people who participate. Mm-hmm. And it's not like it's not for volunteers. It is by volunteers. It is by the participants of Burning Man build Burning Man. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what most people don't appreciate that have not been to Burning Man or haven't really participated in the Burning Man, even if they go, is that the participants actually do build the event. Mm-hmm. So it's a very unique. It's really exciting, and I don't know that it happens anywhere else in the world. It's really cool. People just build this thing for reasons unknown, and it's fucking amazing, and I don't know why.
It works, though.
It works.
Yeah. Well, okay, so then once you do start gearing up, can you talk to me about the process of the pre-build?
Right. So we had the great advantage of already doing a prototype up at Santa Rosa, and then on April 1st, we had a gathering of another meet and greet. It's actually the only meet and greet in public we ever had officially, because to kick off the build cycle. So we chose to do the pre-build of Empyrean at the Santa Rosa winery starting on April 1st. And that weekend we had probably 20 or 30 people. Since we were already practiced at it, many people who had built the previous fall, or the previous fall, were there again, and we jumped right into it. We started building panels and cutting beams, and we were up at Santa Rosa at least 2, sometimes 3 or 4 days a week for all of April, May, June, and July.
Mm-hmm. And so did you pre-built all of the panels?
Yes.
Did you kit the canopies?
The canopies were completely kitted. There's about 120 beams on the canopies total. And every one was pre-cut, pre-assembled, and the rafters, the ridge beams, the sill plates, everything was drilled out, ready to go. All the layout was done, and we all just did that basically in the parking lot in Santa Rosa. And
you're putting all this stuff in trucks or in a big warehouse?
so we just stacked it up for all of April, May, and June, and then in July we just covered up the tarps. We had an entire lumber yard out there, and fortunately we had acres of space, which was extremely helpful. And that people at Santa Rosa Winery were, Dr. Walter Beck is an art enthusiast, and so he allowed us to work on his property. And then in July we put it all on trucks and trucked it out to the desert.
Right. You didn't pre-build the ring.
The ring, correct. There was all the parts were made. So we had two build sites, one in Davis, California, and one in Santa Rosa. And so the crew in Davis built the components for the ring, and they built sections of it. In the same way, it was prefabricated. All the parts were cut. Some sections were pre-built. And same thing with the flame. The flame had 8 trusses, conventional right angle wooden trusses. All those were pre-built. They were loaded, all of that was loaded on a single flatbed truck in Santa Rosa and trucked out in the middle of, in the end of June.
And can you tell me about the one piece that I was so scared about personally were all of the metal pieces that held the ring to the canopy. That seemed, those had never been tested, right? Or
No.
put together.
Well,
So
yeah, and I had to personally design those. So, I mean, the way that works is, so I designed the whole project and proposed theoretically what the brackets would look like. And so that goes to the engineers, and the engineers say, well, it has to be about like this and 1/2-inch steel and about this wide. And then they punt it back to me. So that the compound, and they say, you know, the welds have to be so deep and so long. But what they don't, so they punted back to me, and which is the professional process, and I had to determine all those compound angles and make that work, and then give it to, so I had to produce shop drawings for all that, for each piece of the steel, and then give that to the laser cutting place, Seaport Stainless in Richmond. And then I made a wooden prototype of what it would look like and brought that to, and all the components to an outfit in at Moxie in Oakland, a bunch of welders and seasoned Burning Man volunteers. And then we sat there and prefabricated, we welded up a couple of them. So yes, those
so you
brackets.
didn't purchase those, the volunteers made those as well.
Correct. They were designed. I designed them, made them work, got them cut at the laser cutting place. Somebody brought them over to, I think Rodney brought them over to the weld shop, and he and I'm not a welder, but he is, Rodney Free. He and I sat there for the afternoon and put them together and made sure all the angles worked and got one of them done, and then he and some other welded up the other 15. But that was, I mean, you bring up an important point, because if that didn't work, that was the end of the project. And so all the canopies were, as I discussed earlier, they could freestand, so they were built, and that's fine. But, and the compression ring, in order for it to go up and work, all of those brackets had to be perfectly set, because it was, and they had to be all the right angles, and they were all bolted to the underside of the ring. So when we brought the ring up, they just clicked into place on all the barge rafters. And if it didn't work, if the angles were wrong on the steel, is 26.5 degrees this way and a bevel of 12.6 degrees this way to accept the brackets onto the barge rafters. But if that didn't work, there was no way, we simply didn't have time to fix it on Playa. We couldn't have remade those brackets. They each weighed 200 pounds, and they took months to make. And that was a big moment of truth. When that set in there correctly, that was like, wow, we might actually pull this off.
Right.
It might actually work. It was really, okay, warning to any other temple builders out there, don't make a building as complicated as Empyrean, because it doesn't, you're gonna pull your hair out.
Right.
It was a very complicated structure.
Right. Well, and I feel like you felt you were under pressure the entire time, I assume.
I was exhausted. I was exhausted. It was been 3 years. It was all on my shoulders. I mean, it can't possibly be done without every single one of those. There's a crew of 82 people we brought up there, you being a pivotal member of that. There's another 50 people that were part of the crew that didn't come on to the build crew. That's 130. And there were so many other people that participated and helped the project along. I mean, there's all volunteers. It's not employees of Burning Man, but there's a huge machine behind it at Burning Man. The point is that I was feeling a lot of pressure because no one else was really involved through the whole project that actually knew what was going on. So, if I wasn't right there, I don't know that it could have gotten built. And so I was there, almost from 6:30 to 6:30 every day, or 7 o'clock. And
Right.
I was sweating bullets the whole fucking time, honestly. I was so stressed. I was trying not to be stressed or show that outwardly, and things were going great, and the depth of the crew was astonishing. How many people were skilled and motivated. Mostly it's good natured. That's the key but I was still stressed.
Right. Well, and we had one, I assume you just had setbacks constantly throughout the 3 years. So you had to be resilient there. And then one day on the playa, it was that beautiful evening, and dust storm came up in the middle of the night and knocked over a major piece of the project. Can you tell me about that moment, that morning, and what was going through your mind that day?
So we had built a major component, and it was 30 feet tall and freestanding, and there was a strap on top of it, and we had the VR, the big machine, with its fork through the strap for safety. And the evening was completely still and quiet, which was unusual. And the forklift was there for safety, and I knew it, and somebody, and it wasn't me, removed the forklift, but I looked at it and I thought, the forklift has to go back on there tonight before we go to bed, because this is a safety hazard. And I forgot. And I didn't do it. I probably went to bed because it was an evening crew working, I think, at that point. Somebody needed the VR. They took it down. At least one person said, yeah, they'll put it back up. But nonetheless, it was entirely my responsibility. And then a windstorm kicked up in the middle of the night and blew the thing over. And it was four of the flame trusses and the entire cribbage to set the ring. And I was crushed, because it could have been the end of the project at that stage. We might not. I thought we could recover, but the fact is that it was a 3,000 pound, 30-foot tall structure that collapsed, And had somebody been near it, it would have killed him. And that was horrible. I felt really bad. Because, construction is just safety. That's all that matters. The building doesn't matter. Nobody matters. Money doesn't matter. Nothing matters. In construction, the only thing that matters is safety. And that was a horrible breach of safety protocol on my part. And so I was basically laying on my back crying because I could have killed somebody.
The team kind of rallied.
Yeah, I felt like an idiot. I just felt like an idiot. But other people should have seen it, but it was my responsibility. And I've never, things go wrong on a construction site, but I've never been around something where a 30-foot section of the building collapses. It's just not, it just falls over in a windstorm. And had the VR been up there, it wouldn't have happened. And I just forgot and went to bed. Mm-hmm. Anyway, the squad did rally, and it set us back. But there was a number of people, they just looked at it, and Rachel, God bless her, we put together we as soon as we saw that, we had drivers and trucks going to Reno pretty much immediately before we even knew what lumber we needed. Then we'd call in the lumber order to the lumber yard, and for the next several days there were people leaving at 4 a.m. from Reno with trucks to pick up material, and by the time they got to the Reno lumber yard or the Home Depot, we'd have the order ready for them, and they'd pick it up and they'd get back on the road at 9:30 or 10 and be back into the work site at 3 or 4 in the afternoon. And we did that almost every day for probably about 5 days to recover from that, and other things that were going on. We rallied. We built it. Adam and Justin, and were you on that? Were you doing the? What were you doing?
I didn't build the ring, I didn't build the frame.
Okay.
I was kind of jealous. It looked like a fun part of the project.
Yeah. Well, you did a lot of other things. You're kind of floating. Anyway, people rallied. It did set us back. Really, the thing that was setting us back is the engineers making changes and the heat and the dust. We never stopped because of the heat and the dust. I think people burned out from the heat at around 4 or 5 in the afternoon, typically daily, but we never stopped because of the heat and the dust. Mm-hmm. But it slowed us down a lot.
It felt like a dustier year. I don't know, I've never been out there for a pre-build, but it's just, those storms were relentless.
In 2019, when we built Temple of Direction, there was not a single dust storm. And I was out there, and I remember, everyone says Burning Man is so hot and dusty, and I thought, not dusty at all. It's really not even hot. I don't think the temperatures broke the low 90s the whole time we were building the Temple of Direction. And so Empyrean in 2022 was completely different. It was a windstorm, dust storm every day. And sometimes whiteout conditions. And the heat was brutal. Didn't you think the heat was brutal?
Yeah, it was, I don't know, the whole environment was like, okay, this is one of the hardest things I've ever done.
It was, yes, it was incredibly taxing. I had shoes on that had regular, running shoes, and got playa in my feet. And it took almost 2 months for my feet to heal from that. All my toes were cracking and bleeding after about 5 days, and anyway, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
Okay, so so we put it back together we had 8 professional carpenters and probably 40 really good, otherwise amateur but skilled carpenters. Mm-hmm. So it worked.
Yeah. Can you tell me about some of the team members that you felt like really stepped up in leadership roles?
Um, Almost everybody stepped up in a leadership role, and kind of quietly. It was really fun. This woman, Yildau, showed up on like day 2, and she was with somebody who was building the man, and she just said, "My name's Yildau. I want to be part of this build." And so,
She wasn't part of it before?
no,
Oh my God.
she was a walk-on.
She was a major contributor.
Yes, I mean, isn't that awesome? And so, she was just a delight to work with. At one point, she asked if she could run the VR, and I said, "Sure." It's like, "Do you have any equipment expertise?" She said, "No." I said, "All right, well, go talk to this guy Pete and go practice out there in the desert." And so she did, and she was making deliveries for the rest of the 2
Yeah,
weeks.
she was on it all the time.
She was on all the time, and she's a good builder. There are so many people that were so helpful. Tree J's sister-in-law, Monet, had never been, I don't think, on a construction site, but she's a skydiver, and she just loved getting up high in the heavy equipment. So anytime there was something going up in the air, had her safety harness on, and she wanted to go do that. But she turned out to be a great carpenter. This other person, Stud, who I'd never met, and remember her?
Yeah.
And Present, I had not met them either, and they stepped up. But then there was a crew of like 30 people that they were out of the Santa Rosa area. What's his name? Rodney Free was really instrumental in working with heavy equipment, and it's amazing. Everybody stepped up. They just did their thing, and like I showed people the plans, and I said, "This is what has to happen, and this is the sequence," and I showed people the process of tipping up the A-frame structure or the bents to get them over the sill plates that were anchored to the ground, and this is how it works. And I showed people once or twice, this is what we're going to do, and they just did it. And it was an incredibly hardworking crew, and yeah, everybody rallied.
Yeah.
What was your, like, I mean, it's interesting because I know you were doing a couple of different things, but what was the thing that you think you contributed most on? I mean, you're always working.
Yeah, I mean, what I enjoyed the most was putting up those panels.
Putting them
It
on.
was just, it was neat to be part of, we had to remake a bunch of the panels.
Yeah.
And then so I worked with Hudson on doing that. And so I got to see how the design of these small wooden pieces, and we had to just cut out all those little pieces and see how that was then reflected in the skin of the entire build, which gave it part of its beauty. And then that was, I don't know, it was just rewarding. I was like, I'm building something, I don't know, it's kind of like the story about, a construction worker, and you ask them, what do you do? And I'm building a wall, and people that are lucky in life get to say things like, I'm building a temple.
Yeah. That was the idea of making those panels so accessible, but so integral, so accessible to build to everybody, but so integral to the design, is you could basically say, I built that panel, or I built this part of that. And you actually did. It wasn't just you nailing a board up, but it was you building it. I was thinking about something else, but I forgot.
See what? Yeah, and then I had a question for you, or where's it going?
I was going to suggest that if you're doing visuals with this podcast, you can show the blueprints and then show the panel, and I can, if you want to, I can walk you through the blueprint. I don't have it set here, but I can walk you through that. But to see that whole design on paper on a blueprint, and then see it fabricated, just one of them on a table, and then see it, and then you have the experience. Now watch it go up on the project, the temple itself, is a pretty amazing process.
Yeah, I had a neat experience about that is I shared one of the videos of the burn on social media, and a friend of mine who's 85, she said she's like, oh, it was so neat to see it burning because I could see the patterns.
Yeah.
She didn't know they were called panels, but it was like the burning of the temple revealed the design in a really beautiful way. Did you think of, like, was that part of the strategy, or like when you saw it burning, you're like, wow?
No, when I saw it, I will never. I hope I never forget that. But that burn the flames did amplify the design in a way that hadn't been done naturally in sunlight or with the architectural lighting, and it's interesting. The Santa Rosa project is lit at night, and because it's just two canopies. And the way the lighting is, you can really see the design there, and it's very, very pronounced. On Playa, it seems like the design, the tessellating patterns on the facade of the canopies, the panel designs, went away a little bit, but the fire really accentuated that and showed what that was about, and it was really, and no, I did not anticipate that.
Yeah.
I did, by the way, Burning Man wants to have, they really want to have the temple, when it ignites, they want to have it flat on the ground in 15 minutes, and so they're like, so is that possible? Is this going to happen? It's like, yeah, it'll burn down. But I knew very well it was going to be at least 30 minutes they asked if we wanted to hobble the building to make it collapse faster. It's like, oh no, it'll burn in 15 minutes. But I didn't want it to burn in 15 minutes. Mm-hmm. I mean, I wanted to stay, so as if you watch the video, it was more like, I think it's more like 25, 30 minutes it stayed up. Mm-hmm. And not by accident.
And what was the experience of watching it burn like for you?
It was, I definitely went through the thought of, this is the biggest mistake of my life. Like, I can't believe I just did this for 3 years. I barely had a decent night's sleep through the entire event week. And I was working through event week to keep camp going and to keep, shit just happens at Burning Man. And so I barely had a moment's rest. And all of a sudden it's over. And we go burn it, and it's this, like, I just wasted my life. This is the most ridiculous fucking thing I've ever done in my life. Mm-hmm. But I don't regret it. And it is ridiculous. It is absolute folly. But that's the definition of it. Mm-hmm. It's impermanence, and it's a reimagining your time. And so architecture and art most often is for something that's lasting, particularly architecture. You want to build, that was a piece of classical, it's a classic piece of monumental architecture with respect to how its architectural form, space, and order, what it looks like as a monument. The temple, the pyramids of Giza are classic monumental architecture, or the Arc de Triomphe in Paris, or classic temples or churches. And Empyrean was a kind of quintessential piece of monumental architecture. It could have stayed there for 1,000 years, but that's not the program. The program is that it can only last there because it's not permanent. You can only pull that off in the middle of the desert because of the contract with the community, which is it's not permanent. And so I had a lot of mixed emotions. It's the stupidest thing I've ever done, but it was the most rewarding thing I've ever done with respect to art and architecture and building and community building. And I mean, the fact that you're here and it's not it's a good trade-off.
Well, and have you heard from the community since the event's over about the meaningfulness of the project to other people?
Yeah, a lot of people, just with the crew we had here last night, sitting around the fire, a lot of people still say it was a life-changing event. And I know and I'm really rewarded by that, that I had the opportunity to be the crew leader to make that happen. And, you know, the, Burning Man is this thing and stuff happens. And so I was a small part of that, even though Temple is a big part of Burning Man, and I was a big part of Temple, and I put that crew together and made that happen. It's Burning Man still built it. I didn't really build it, right? I mean, our crew of 80 people built it, and I tried to give it away as much as possible, and I tried to, as soon as I saw someone doing something and it was the right thing to do, I tried to back off and not intervene. And so a lot of people were empowered, and that was the goal, and they had wonderful experience. When I was out in 2019, when I went out there for Temple of Direction, as a walk-on, not knowing anybody, what I felt was just so magic. There's just the whole madness of, everybody's just running around like crazy, and somehow it got built. And I still am not sure how that happened. And it didn't really seem like there was anybody in charge. And we just went and did it, and it was so fun. And that's a big part of what I wanted to create at Empyrean, is the opportunity for someone to feel that same thing. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people did. And so in that respect, it was a great success.
Yeah. You said you've had experience in construction, but have you led a crew like this before?
Not this big. No, I mean, so like this, all volunteer, working under horrendous conditions, good food, but otherwise miserable conditions. A lot of people, didn't know shit about construction. And so, have I ever led a crew this big? No. I mean, I did in Temple of Direction. I was as a leader, but I was not the leader on the project. Mm-hmm. I've led other construction projects. I've done lots of architecture projects where there's lots of professionals involved, but nothing like leading a crew of 80, 45 of whom were actually on the build squad. No, I've never really done anything like that.
And after having gone through the experience, learned, do you have any advice or thoughts for those that will follow in your footsteps and on leading a crew of?
There's so much to know about that, but pick your crew carefully. And it's not about, you only need because it's Burning Man Temple, you need people with skill sets and experience in construction, but it's mostly about the energy that each person brings. And so you can have, I would much rather have 2 or 3 volunteers that know very little, but are enthusiastic and are safe and have some common sense, as opposed to the one person who may have a lot of experience but might not be able to get along with the rest of the crew. And we had a really good crew. I mean, there was just, everybody got along. One person blew up and ran away, but I don't know. What would I tell another? The playa provides. That it works on Temple. You have to have faith, be well organized, get good people, and it'll work.
That's cool. This is the first temple you've built? This is the first sacred space you've designed?
So the type of architecture I studied in University of Colorado is about sacred architecture. And when I was a student, we did a temple, so to speak. We built one as volunteers on the University of Colorado campus. It was ugly as sin. It was just a disaster, but it was good because I got the opportunity to build a.
Was it temporary?
It was meant to be semi-permanent, and it was so ugly and incomplete that it was torn down by the university when we all went on spring break. But that was a good opportunity. I started to design a Buddhist temple for a group of Buddhists that I had met in southern Colorado, but that did not. That didn't get off the ground. They just didn't have the funding. So, with respect to Empyrean, it's the first sacred space I had ever really designed that was to be built, that actually got built.
And can you tell me what in your life led you to want to do something like that?
That's a hard thing to know. But I've always wanted to design art and architecture, design and build, and I don't know. But it was the idea of having a space and a home for basically anybody without. You don't have to go there, and you don't have to pledge allegiance to anything or anybody, and you can participate. And on top of that, the project is for anybody to do anything with. It's just a safe space to go. So you don't have to say you believe in this religion or this person, or believe in it or not believe in it, or you don't have to know what it's about. It's like climbing a mountain. You know it's going to be hard, and there's something about doing it, and particularly doing it with your friends in a small community. There's that challenge, but at the same time, it's the challenge is also about creating a space for other people with no questions asked, and that's the essence of Burning Man Temple. Is you do it without question for people, and you don't ask. They don't ask. You don't ask. They may just participate by visiting or sitting down. The builders build. There's a couple of handshakes, but it's just there. It's like it appears. It's a mirage, and it's gone. And people get a lot of, peace out of that.
Right. You told me one time that the flame, and correct me if I'm wrong, was in your mind, a galactic transmitter.
Yeah, it's a transceiver, and so yes, it is. So the Empyrean flame is the idea. The Empyrean means P-Y-E, pyre. In the beginning of that word, the etymology of that is Greek initially from fire, and it evolved to mean. Empyrean was the space between heaven and earth. So the flame was because it was suspended 15 feet above the gathering space, and it came down to a point almost like you could talk to it, and it went up in a octahedron form, and then came back together at the very apex of the structure, 70 feet in the air, and pointed to the heavens. It was a space that I'm not, I don't really believe it was a galactic transceiver. It is if you believe it is. I'm not super woo-woo about those kind of things, but Huxley did say, and I am more inclined to feel this than I did 30 years ago when I first heard this statement, but he said anyone that doesn't believe in mysticism is insane. And given what he wrote, Huxley, and where he came from, that's, at first that statement sounds insane. It's like, who is he to judge that someone who doesn't believe in mysticism is actually insane? But I actually believe he believed it, like they're literally out of touch with reality if they don't believe in mysticism. And I'm inclined to believe that. And the mysticism is starts with, I don't know. So, I mean, that's kind of the definition of mysticism. And so the flame, it's a galactic transceiver. It's designed to message up and down and at the same time, and that's to transceive. And I said it was a galactic transceiver, slightly tongue-in-cheek, but not really. Because it is. Because if that's what you want it to be, that's what it is. And that's the mysticism of, that's the ultimate mysticism of that piece of work, is that, you know, I also said at one point that the building was going to float and fly, and I think it did. You just have to believe it.
Did you, by the time the project was complete, were you able to enjoy it, to sit in there and have a mystical connection with a divine sense of spirit?
No.
It was too much work?
It was too much work. I was too tired. Went out there a number of times to try to hang the banners correctly because they got tangled up in the wind. I liked watching people interact with it. But I never had 5 minutes to relax. And so my experience was that clearly I saw other people value it, and it had a great meaning, but I went out there a few times. I was so exhausted I couldn't do anything other than just try and exist. So, to answer your question, no, I didn't have anything like that. Maybe next time.
Do you get it at all when you go visit the site in Santa Rosa? Does it feel like a divine space, a sacred space?
It does. It does, and that's because it's it's more, a lot of people actually go up there, and they visit occasionally the crew that built it. And it does feel to me like a divine space, and seeing it at night with the lights on it is, you know what it does is it brings me back to the whole energy of the crew and how much fun we had making it. It's really not about, I mean, it's a beautiful structure, it's a piece of monumental work up there, it's going to be up there for years, maybe a couple of decades, but I always go back to thinking about the fun, not about the building, but the energy it took to create the building, and all the people who are involved, and that's what I think about when I look at it.
Yeah.
All the hands that were on it that made it. You know, you can't build essentially valueless structures like that anywhere than Burning Man. The building Empyrean didn't have a floor, it didn't have a roof. It wasn't really shade shelter, it wasn't really wind shelter or rain shelter. It was, it's just a big, you couldn't build that anyplace else except at Burning Man with those volunteers that don't ask why. And so, yeah, it's a different, if going up to Santa Rosa, I can relax and just sit there. You're going to ask about the portals. We never talked about those.
Yeah, go ahead. Well, I mean, you talked a little bit about the design of the portals is reflective of the design of the panels.
Right. And so, okay, so the portals there, probably the most meaningful portals are the one that reached out to the man. So there's 4 portals from the edge of Empyrean that go south towards the man, or look at it differently. When you come from the man and you get on the Avenue of Lanterns, there's a series of 4 portals there. And each one of them has different meaning. The first one is in the shape of a pentagon, which is the shape of the city. And that is the one I attributed the name to Atum, which is the maker or the finisher, which is which was repeated, that portal on the western entrance to the temple grounds. So the reason that it's a pentagon is in recognition of the people who build the city, and the idea that you're you're familiar with the city, if you look at the plan of the city from the air, in plan, it's laid out as a pentagon. Um, and the idea is that you're leaving the city, the people who make the city, and also the shape of the city, the familiarity of it, the pentagon, and you're going through a different space. So each one of those portals is a different experience like that. Also, each portal, the idea for, there's a lot going on there, but the reason that there were all those portals there was to basically reach out to the people who are coming in from Playa and were experiencing Temple as a pilgrimage as they entered the main entrance or approached the main entrance of the structure. So from a great distance you see Empyrean, and it's this big, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger as you get closer to it, and you realize it's a piece of monumental architecture, and you walk hundreds and hundreds of yards and it gets bigger. But when you approach those portals, what you see is that the portal, the ring itself, the geometry and the columns overtake, if you're walking straight up to them, overtake the building, and then all of a sudden you don't realize it, but you're focused just on the portal. And the fabric hanging down was the reason for that is it's flapping in the wind. That's the veil that conceals the object of desire. So what do you desire? You're on a pilgrimage to see the monumental architecture and the promise that holds. You see the portal, it completely envelops your visual field. The fabric is flapping, and you can see little glimpses, vignettes of the object of desire, the temple, through the portal as the fabric goes back and forth. And that's the idea is that the fabric is, in addition to being a veil, it's something you'd never see. You've never seen on a temple before at Burning Man. There's never been fabric or color on the building. Mm-hmm. And so this was intentional. It's like, what do you expect? Well, what you saw before. And so the use of fabric was, it's never been done, it's soft and flexible, it's highly colorful, it flaps in the wind, it makes noise, all these things you don't expect and you can hear and see and experience. And okay, so you approach the temple, the portal, and over each portal, or in each portal, was a little footbridge, only about this high, about this wide, and it's a transitional space. So it's the footbridge acts as it is a threshold, and the footbridge is peaked at the center of the portals. So as you walk up to the portal, you stop looking at the temple, you're looking at the fabric and the geometry, and you kind of imagine walking through the portal. You walk up the little apex of the footbridge, and very often people would stop there by design. And then you walk through a portal that's only this, what appears to be a huge, magnificent portal. It's actually only this wide. It's only 3 inches wide. So you step up on the footbridge through the threshold, and people would kind of look around like this, and they'd step down the tiny little footbridge and they'd be through the portal. The point of that is that there's lots of ways to project portal or transition. The point of that is that the portal is only that wide. That's all it takes to get from here to there is a transition of that much space. Mm-hmm. It's an architectural experience that you wouldn't notice it unless someone explained it to you, but you certainly feel it as you walk through these. So then there was the next portal was Atum was Bennu, and it was a circle, and that was the circle, like the circle of inclusion, and the North Star, which is so the circle of inclusion, and on top of that was the Star of Bennu, which is the idea of the regrowth. So you walk through that portal, and again, the traffic pattern is, or the pedestrian pattern is like a meditation. Go up the footpath, through the footpath, see the second portal, you see the object of desire, the veil comes down more as you approach it, you walk up the footpath again, now you can see the temple again, you walk down the little portal, you walk, or the little footbridge, and you walk another 150 feet to the next one. And again, the object of desire, the temple, is obscured by the veil, and you go through that process 4 times. And it's a meditation to basically just slow people down and allow people to experience architecture and experience the processional way to get to the architecture. And so why would you want to do that? Well, the Avenue of Lanterns is a fixed processional way. And the idea of creating an architectural way to create a sacred space, you have to kind of back up. And to create a sacred space, you generally create ritual, and the ritual leads to the sacred space. And in order to create ritual, typically in architecture, there's a processional way through which you develop a narrative of ceremony. Okay, so there's a footpath. In this case, it's linear. The ceremony is going through the portals. The ceremony, the process of creating ceremony and engaging in that linear path, or circuitous path, is the ritual of experiencing architecture. And through that process and driving into the middle of the structure, the ritual leads you to the sacred space in the middle. And the sacred space is developed by you participating in that ritual process, getting to the middle, and seeing the space that is created, or participating in the space is created by all the volunteers simply by being there. And so going back to what Christopher Alexander said, the academic from UC Berkeley, is that the creation of sacred space is the space without a name. It's the quality without a name, and it's created simply by people's energy and wanting to go someplace that is safe and familiar and energized.
As you're describing it, it makes me feel very fortunate to have been able to experience.
Good.
Like it was such a fleeting moment. You're right. And I guess it's kind of like life, how lucky you are to experience any sacred space.
Yeah, and we are lucky, Justin. I mean, we're lucky to have ever done that. We create. Most people would never articulate what they experienced out there like I'm trying to describe. Some people can do it better than I can because I'm stumbling through it. I think in geometries and architecture, form, space, and order, and not in the English language. So it's hard for me to convey what I'm trying to convey. But we did, you and I and the rest of us, we did create a space out there that people experienced. What they experienced, I don't know. Now, I'm not trying to notice, I didn't ever say what you should experience going through this linear process. If it's a Christian church or a Jewish synagogue, the processional way is very described, and every brick and every door and every turn to the left or right or gaze forward is described in the religious teachings. And it goes back thousands of years. And for any one of those major religions, or a new one you'd make up. But here, we're not ascribing anything to a particular experience. It's just experience. And what that means is, so going through that process of going through those portals, is the opportunity is that people are present and experience every step of the way. It's not, because there's nothing in the middle, and there's no altar in the middle, and in the middle of the temple, there's nothing but people. There's nothing to go to. It's the experience every step of the way that is the value. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing about building temple, and what you just said is you were happy to have that experience, and that's the point. You had the experience then, and that's the best we could do, and it makes it all the more poignant by the fact that the building doesn't exist anymore. It lasted for such a short period, it's almost as if it didn't exist. And so I spent a lot of time out of temple by myself. I visit every day, and I just stand there by myself and look and watch people, how they were visiting it, and how they would enter it, and most people actually walked around the portals. They didn't actually go through them, and they were chatting.
You didn't tell them how.
And I didn't tell anybody how, but occasionally, probably 1 out of 20 people, I never interacted with them, but they just walked. They did what I hoped they would do, which is they came from afar and they saw the temple disappear into each portal, and they I don't know what they were thinking, but they were experiencing, and they walked up the little threshold and they stopped, and then they walked down, and then they got the next portal into their field of vision, and they kind of looked up and they paused, and then they approached it more slowly, and they went through that cadence, and maybe 1 in 20, maybe 1 in 40 people actually did that.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else found value somewhere else, or maybe didn't find value. I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe they're just there to photograph so they can get on TikTok. I don't know.
Yeah, I remember after we finished the portals, I walked down to the man, all the way down to the man and back, just to sort of.
Did you?
Yeah, it was one of the neatest days because the event wasn't open, yeah, I think we finished the portals before the event opened.
Yes.
And the man had just been sort of put into place, and so it was like I had to apply it by myself. Everybody was at dinner or something.
Mm-hmm.
It was really neat experience just to sort of, like you said, I don't even think I thought about what I was doing, but I was just observing the structure from a journey, I guess.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was a journey. It was a pilgrimage, and people come from years away and hundreds or thousands of miles away to engage in this pilgrimage. And I did actually encourage, without saying you should go down there and check this out, but I did through my talks at camp to encourage people to go do like you did. I don't know, I think you might have been the only person that did it, but go outside the temple and walk through the portals and experience it. And I don't know how many people actually did, but they were fucking magnificent, weren't they?
Yeah, that's cool. And I love the drone videos of they're just sort of
right.
They're sort of doing it for us. There's at least you can re-experience it that way.
Right.
Any after you got done, is there any big lessons that you took for yourself?
So I know that this is. So I was thinking about the burn and thinking about the insanity of Burning Man in general, and the idea of spending all that time building a structure that's gone. But I'd rather have built it and burned it than not to have built.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's it's an old parody, but it's I know I'm supposed to say it wasn't created, it's supposed to be fleeting, and it's all gone, and that's the part of impermanence. And I do think that to some degree, but it still stings that it's gone. But that's the only way it can get built, is by the people who believe in that kind of impermanence.
Right.
And participate in that group, in that crowd.
Right. It's like you have to acknowledge impermanence, but you don't have to like it.
Well, I did so there's a lot of rumors of Burning Man. It's quite a rumor mill. And so I did start one, but I'm not really, as you know, very good on social media. And I intentionally stayed off it as much as possible. So I did try and start a rumor that I had petitioned the BLM to keep the Empyrean permanently and not burn it.
Uh-huh.
And I pushed that around on email and
This is like in the weeks leading up to Burning Man last year.
in the months leading up to Burning Man. And a few people got it and questioned me about it, and I was hoping it was going to take off as a thing. Mm-hmm. That I personally was petitioning and I was. But I didn't get very far. I mean, the gag would have had to be a little more robust. I was thinking about actually showing the application to the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, that I submitted for the permanent placement of Empyrean on Playa. But I didn't have the energy for it, so I didn't do it. I didn't do it very well.
But there's a part of your heart that wishes you could go out there and see it again.
Yes, yes, and I don't, it's not something I would, I shouldn't in my right mind. It cost me a lot. It cost me 3 years. It cost me a fortune financially, but it was also, certainly one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. The whole 4 years of doing the last temple and this one. I'm not sure I'd ever do it again, but somebody else is building the temple now, and I kind of holding my hand back, like I shouldn't get near it. Like I can't possibly spend more time on another temple, but they're fielding questions, and I'm responding them and helping them with budgets or giving them advice on budgets and trucking and construction methodology and what people are the right ones to select and blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
So if I ever say I'm going to do this again, hit me.
Okay. Well, what is the future for Renzo?
Oh, this is funny. I actually have there's a temple in Boulder that initially was designed as memorializing, unfortunately, a mass shooting in my neighborhood in Boulder. I designed it in 2020 for the local burner community. Proposed a project and asked if I would participate and design it, which I did, and it's now late January 2022, and I just put the permit in for that in the city of Boulder for a building permit for that. It's called the Temple of Tranquility. And we hope to build it this spring. I'm also working on and we might actually take it apart and bring it to Burning Man.
Cool.
And burn it in 2022, which I propose we do. But Rachel Kane and Caroline Kurt are the project directors of that Temple of Tranquility, so it's up to them. But if I have a say in it, we'll take it to Burning Man. Another thing is I have a large sculpture I'm working on here in Santa Rosa that I would like to take to Burning Man, but not part of the temple. Mm-hmm. And I continue with my art and architecture career.
Cool.
So that's what I'm doing.
Just keep creating.
Yes, just keep creating, and yeah.
Cool.
If anybody out there has never participated in the Burning Man, don't just show up. Go volunteer somehow. Volunteer on temple but it's not that fun if you just show up, unless you're a partier. But showing up and participating might lead to joining the Burning Man cult and ruining your life.
You'll spend 4 years building a temple.
Right, and going broke in the meantime. And and abandoning all other responsibilities.
Right. Earthly concerns were
concerns, yes.
Not your priority for 3 years.
Yeah, we've moved past that, haven't we? We're more in the ethereal realm now.
I guess we are now.
Yes, We're just floating around. We don't need earthly possessions or needs or concerns.
Right. Cool. Well, Renzo, thanks for your leadership and for building a magnificent structure that I think thousands of people enjoyed, and I hope more people get to see at least visuals of it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
Is there anything else, any other part of the experience that you wanted, a story that you wanted to relate?
Why'd you go out there? I mean, you showed up, you kind of sent a resume and you just showed up, and you've been to Burning Man a lot of times, and you were miserable out there for the first couple of days, and because it was so hot and dusty, and you were questioning why you were there. So why'd you go?
I've been to Burning Man, this was my 10th time. but I had never really contributed in a meaningful way. And I saw when you were fundraising for it, I gave a donation and I got on the email chains, and then I decided, oh well, if I could be part of this, that'd be a meaningful thing for me to do. And I had, my whole life was, I got divorced in 2020. My business went under in 2020. I left San Diego and went back to my hometown. So I had all of this. Everything had changed, and I don't know. There's just an email from Memphis started a chain of events that led me to just be out there. It was like I was swept away into. I don't really know, honestly. I don't know exactly how it all happened, because it just sort of felt like after I got that, I started communicating with Memphis. I just found myself out there building with you.
Well, Memphis was a strong advocate, and so Memphis and Rachel and Tree J and Gravity were key on selecting staff, and ultimately it was my decision, but I really, and Nick, but really those guys, we all came to a unanimous vote, but Memphis advocated strongly for you. I didn't know who you were, but she said she had talked to you, and this is the kind of person we wanted, and you had carpentry skills, and I looked at that, but that was anyway. Memphis was a big fan, and everybody, and she knew, like, she could talk to people and recite the pros and cons and values of the conversations of every single person she interviewed, and I think she interviewed just about the entire staff at one point, and so good for her. She that was key. She came on April 1st, and she was immediately somebody I latched onto as a good organizer, a good people person, and so point is I relied on her a lot, and you and she connected,
Mm-hmm.
and that's how you got selected as staff.
Well, and I guess that sort of brings up a little bit about Memphis's work and the fundraising. Can you talk a little bit about how the fundraising for and the funding for the temple happens?
So the fundraising